All right. Hello, everyone out in the ServiceNow community. It's Michael here, and I don't want to, well, maybe I kind of want to, but I need to talk with you about Workflow Data Fabric and getting into why this is really, truly a powerful tool belt in the ServiceNow platform of enterprise workflow. So, one of the things to keep in mind when it comes to enterprise data in general is the fact that we are talking about processes that go across multiple groups: IT, HR, facilities, whatever, right? But more importantly, it goes across multiple processes. And there are going to be times when data that's needed to give some kind of answer, be it AI or just in general for something as part of a process, is not going to be data that is living on the ServiceNow platform. Now, you could always pull data in, but that being said, sometimes there's data you don't want stored on the ServiceNow platform. So this is where Workflow Data Fabric starts to come in. Now, keep in mind, ServiceNow has always been able to do the concept of zero copy. So you're going to hear about zero copy connectors. Most of it's talking about the new Workflow Data Fabric connectors. However, as a concept, remote tables has been available, I think, since New York. I'll get into that in a little bit. So the concept of zero copy in ServiceNow is not new. But one of the reasons why I'm excited, and yes, I'm kind of excited because I'm a nerd, is the fact that Workflow Data Fabric isn't just about pulling data that's external in external systems and bringing it to ServiceNow for the workflow. It's also about doing it in a more efficient manner using a different technology than the traditional remote tables. So whenever I talk about zero copy connectors or zero copy in general, I have to specify, am I talking about zero copy as a concept, which we've always had for a few years or several years now? Or is it the zero copy connectors, which is now kind of falling under this capability under the Workflow Data Fabric? So let's go ahead and just jump in here and talk a bit about it. So Workflow Data Fabric, and incidentally, the Workflow Data Fabric Hub is now out and available in Yokohama. You have to be on, I believe, Yokohama Patch 5 in order to utilize it. So yes, you'll have to upgrade. If you're on Xanadu, now's a great time to consider your Yokohama upgrade, especially since Zurich is about to come out. And the big premise of it is the fact that, once again, ServiceNow may need external enterprise data to go ahead and help make decisions in a process or workflow. So it is, once again, about bringing that data to the workflow itself, but doing it in such a way that you don't have to worry about data being stored on the ServiceNow platform and then having to worry about security and that kind of stuff as well. So what we're trying to do is first make those connections to various different data sources. Today we have zero copy connectors out for Databricks, Snowflake, and I think Confluence is going to be coming out for an external connector, which is kind of a different part of ServiceNow. So not to confuse everything with these connectors. But the biggest thing about it, especially with Workflow Data Fabric, is ServiceNow will see this data as like a native table, which is just how remote tables work. I don't know the architecture. I think remote tables are being involved in some kind of definition way. But that being said, ServiceNow sees it as native, which means it's very easy to build reports and leverage that in the rest of your workflow. So what we're trying to do is connect, understand what's going on with that data. So putting it in some context of the workflow. And then the biggest part about ServiceNow, and this is a huge value part to it, is the fact that ServiceNow is all about being a system of action. So being able to take some kind of action against that data, it could be decision making, it could be using that data and maybe storing in another system, whatever that is. There is some kind of action taking place. So from the ServiceNow perspective, we are trying to get more in line with just leveraging all this data across the enterprise. And that is where ServiceNow is really driving to be a true enterprise platform. So one of the big reasons why I love this concept of enterprise data is that if you look at the value that ServiceNow can give a customer, and I always like to think of it as a pyramid. So this is my personal representation, how it fits in my mind. I think of ServiceNow as a solid pyramid that's giving you some level of data. And by the way, you can go into the physics separately, but just know pyramids are very, 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 very stable structures. They've been around for thousands of years, literally, and you see them across multiple, continents, mainly because it's the best way to build something without it falling down. And I love this for the value kind of conversation because it is about trying to build that stable foundation. So it's a very good analogy in my opinion. But one of the key parts about a pyramid itself is just having that strong foundation. And so if you look at just using ServiceNow for IT service management, once again, it is all about the data that you have in those ITSM processes. So the more processes you pull in with more data, incident, problem, change, release, if you're doing any of the DevOps as well, if you're starting to get into service portfolio management, demand management, all that, the more you bring into it, the higher that pyramid can go, the more value. But what you're going to find out is there's going to be a plateau. There's going to be an end to it. So you may have your basic IT service management data, which is in ServiceNow. You're going to have the ServiceNow platform capabilities that's driving those processes and automating those processes, and maybe even doing automation to talk to other systems out there to automate things. And then if you add on other capabilities like Now Assist, using generative AI to reduce the amount of time it takes manual tasks like knowledge creation, for example, that's going to give you more value. And then on the top of that is the agentic AI. Can you use AI there to be available as kind of a ride or die kind of system where you can ask a bunch of questions and it can leverage all these agents to do things for you? So agentic and Now Assist, of course, are things that are the add-on with the current plus type of SKUs as well. So you can imagine if you start with just basic ITSM data and you're using the basic ServiceNow ITSM workflow, you're only going to get so high in this pyramid of value. Now Assist and agentic gets you higher. Well, now if you start to consider the other workflows that we have, so we're talking about HR service delivery, customer service management, looking at the industries, for example. Well, now you've got multi-data workflow, so the pyramid's going to get higher. Stronger foundation of data of these multiple processes, ServiceNow capabilities for the automation across them. Everyone's on the same platform. It's going great. Everyone's happy, blah, blah, blah. Throw on Now Assist and agentic. Great. Now you've even got more data, more value there that's coming from it. Enterprise workflow. Great. But we're still hitting a plateau. And one of the big reasons why we're hitting this plateau is because there is only so much data on the ServiceNow platform. So you have this limited view of the data to run the enterprise that is only going to be accessible by the ServiceNow workflows. So this is where Workflow Data Fabric comes in, because now we are growing a bigger base. We don't just have the ServiceNow workflow. We have got the enterprise data, Snowflake, Databricks, looking at other connectors like SharePoint, Confluence, tons of different data that's out there. Now, I also want to iterate. We are not connecting data just to connect to data sources. We are connecting data to help drive workflow. And I always like to highlight that context, because what I always like to iterate is the fact that we're trying to consider what data you need for which workflow and how it's being leveraged to help guide what you should even connect to. Because trust me, I've gone through and discussed integrations with customers, and often I'll ask, hey, why do you want to do this integration? And they're like, I don't know. We just think we'll need the data. But if you don't actually spend the time to understand why, then you're not able to articulate the value with it, which is one of the reasons why I love human-centered design, looking at how people work and then figuring out, okay, now we understand why. But if you see here in kind of this pyramid scheme, so to speak, the idea with it is, pyramid scheme, kind of comes out a little bit, I guess, as a scam. Sorry about that. But that being said, in the pyramid's building of this value, once again, having that stronger foundation of enterprise data means you can build up higher. So that data is now available to the different multi-workflow data that's already in ServiceNow, in addition to all the ServiceNow platform capabilities to automate it, in addition to Now Assist, in addition to agentic AI. So if you start to look at how you can best leverage ServiceNow, ultimately you're going to have to get to that enterprise data to leverage the most amount of capabilities if you're using Now Assist, if you're agentic. And this is why, once again, I'm excited, because it is now bridging that gap of what you can do with just the ServiceNow data to now what you can do for the enterprise. So this is kind of the why this is important. And of course, every customer is different. Every maturity for those customers are different. It's one of those things where it's going to depend on where your strategic goals are, what you're driving towards. But in general, I firmly believe that, hey, having access to all this data is going to make things infinitely more valuable to all the different enterprise workflows you have. So this kind of goes over to, hey, we've already been able to access external data for years, I think since New York, finding this cover slide from an old presentation I did years ago. And so with that, with remote tables and zero copy, what's the difference between the remote tables and the workflow data fabric and workflow data fabric hub we have nowadays, and why is this important? Well, remote tables has always worked with a combination of integration hub and then a scripting engine for the remote table definition. I'm going to show you in a ServiceNow demo what this looks like. I love to show things in the platform so people can understand that, yes, how it really works, and yes, it does work. But just know that number one, those remote tables look native to the platform. So they show up in reporting and workflow and those sorts of things. But then number two, you need to have some kind of integration mechanism to pull the data. So I demo this a couple different ways. One of them is using a REST API connecting into a Jira environment that I use for demos, but then also using a JDBC database connection to a MariaDB database that I run here in my home. So any way you can connect to different technologies using an integration hub, you can leverage that data. You use the remote table definition to script how the structure is going to go, and then it presents that data to the user as like a native table. But here's the challenges with remote tables. You get into limitations of data because it always typically populates the data at runtime. Now you can cache it for performance purposes, but that's only going to get you so far. When someone looks at that table, it's going to run, it's going to pull that data over. So if you're doing a JDBC through a mid server, so you're then going to have that lag time as the mid server does the next check-in and then runs and pulls the data. If you're going to a REST API, you're going to have that lag as the data comes over. And if it's a large amount of data, it can take more time. And so you end up with a bottleneck of always considering the user experience, how you're interacting with that data, and how much data is coming over. So whenever it's come to remote tables, I always advise to say, hey, build out your integration hub connections to pull as limited amount of data as possible. So whenever I have my connection to my Jira environment, for example, I'm putting in a query to limit the data that's coming through. For example, I'm querying to say, hey, show me the data of the stories that are assigned to me, for example. Or if I'm showing a SQL query on my MariaDB database here I have in my home, I'm running a SQL query to limit the data. So I'm trying to always keep the user experience in mind, and that means there's a limitation because essentially there's a bottleneck of the amount of data you're bringing through. So where remote tables kind of comes in compared to the zero copy connectors is that remote tables in that top part there is just using integration hub for kind of that serial connection. The more data, the longer it's going to take to run. Bad user experience. The workflow data fabric, zero copy connectors, so ZCCs as more of a capability versus a concept, it is using a distributed query language engine called Trino. And I love this because it's built on Java. So it very fits well with a lot of what we already have in ServiceNow. And if you read about Trino, and I have a book on that I've been reading about, is it uses different JVMs or nodes essentially to have workers available to query data. So you can now query one or more data sources in a parallel fashion to pull that data in. So it's not serial, it's parallel. So now with the idea of the zero copy connectors in ServiceNow, you can pull from the same data source, but you've got all these different lines here of data that's coming in. So this means that essentially you can have larger data sets out there that you can pull into the platform without copying it to ServiceNow and still maintaining that performance. Now, I don't know the nuances of the architecture. I just read about, how it runs, whatever. But in what I'm going to demo today, I'm going to show these two differences, not only in the efficiency and understanding of under the hood, which is kind of what this is explaining, but also from a configuration perspective with ServiceNow. Because what you're going to see here in a little bit is when I set up remote tables to my SQL database, I spent several hours scripting and understanding, that scripting portion. So if you're not a JavaScript person, it's going to be even harder. But I had to script out those definitions. And incidentally, those remote tables and those scripting definitions are used in other parts of the platform, not just for external data. So if you go through mobile, there's like the mobile catalog through the mobile application, and all those categories that are shown there are actually remote tables. So it's important to highlight remote tables are basic core platform capability. They're available for everyone to use under just that platform portion of it, the licensing. And really, the only thing that's coming to additional licensing is more of the integration hub transactions. The workflow data fabric, yes, is going to have the additional licensing. Talk to your account team. I'm not going to get into that. But also keep in mind, there is more infrastructure running it for better efficiency. So it's one of those cases where it comes to, once again, what are your use cases? How much data is coming through? So remote tables are going to be very limited. I think the recommendation is about keeping it to about 1,000 records. Workflow data fabric, I don't know how large it can get. Certainly more than 1,000. I could say millions. I'm not a product. I can't speak to that. But this is just to kind of show you the nuances between that remote tables and the workflow data fabric. So I'm done with the workflow data fabric portion. Yes, we've got all these partners and everything. I'm not going to get into that. But now I want to switch over to my instance, my demo environment, because I love demos. I love showing this stuff work. And my first thing I'm going to show you here is what a remote table looks like, both natively as well as under the hood. So I've done a video on remote tables before. I don't know, it may be out on my YouTube. So needless to say, I'm going to remote tables here. That is a SQL database. It pulled the query to say, hey, show me everything assigned to my current user. You saw that it kind of took a few seconds. And this is my data here. And if I go to Workflow Studio, see, I didn't have it up ready to go in a tab, like I'm showing everything live here. If I go to my Workflow Studio and bring up my connection for this in terms of how it's talking to it, I've got a action defined to connect to SQL. You see all my stuff here and all the demos, and this is an environment that I've used for a very long time. So, it's one of those cases where there's a lot of stuff in my demo environment. And I should have an action here for doing a SQL query. I think it is this one. I'm probably not even going to edit this out either. I just keep things real, so to speak. And it's just an action connecting to my database. You can see here's my SQL. I'm using my user ID. So my SQL query is built that it's taking dynamic data for me as a user and bringing back a limited set of data. And that is how I'm minimizing the amount of data that's coming through. Works great, but very specific. Now, the last thing I'm going to show you is under my remote tables, the definition I had to go through. So I had to go through creating a table essentially and saying, hey, here is going to be the fields that I have. And then I also had to create this remote table definition to essentially say, great, let me go ahead and take this data that's coming back from the SQL call, parse it out, assign the data from the JSON data that's coming through. Oh, it took a while to load there. Just going to go back to it here. And then I had to script it out, all this here, to essentially assign that JSON that's coming back from my call over into the different fields in the defined table. So this took some time to set up. Absolutely doable, works great. You're a scripting person. I copied some of this, I think, from existing remote tables. No problem. I was demoing the concept of zero copy at Knowledge 25. And once again, it's important to highlight that zero copy as a concept has been in ServiceNow for years, since at least New York remote tables came out. But you can imagine this took a lot of time to set up. So I scoped it and created a application that I can, go from instance to instance, and great. Now, let me show you real time setting this same thing up in the Workflow Data Fabric. So to begin with, I got to get to my Workflow Data Fabric hub. And of course, my menu has to refresh, right? My Workflow Data Fabric hub. Now, you're going to see here that we have some available connectors out of box. Databricks, Snowflake, Amazon Redshift, which, by the way, I did an integration with Amazon Redshift, I don't know how many years ago, 3 years ago, 4 years ago, connected it to like the AI search and indexing it. So whenever we come out this kind of stuff, I always am like, oh, I could have used this years ago. Whatever. Incidentally, our connector for Confluence is coming out, and I'm like, I already built one a few years ago, but that's, needless to say, I'm always saying product management is having to catch up to me with the work that I've been doing. But needless to say, we have available connectors, and more importantly, we have these community connectors. Now, I'm not going to get into the difference between primary connectors and community connectors. Talk to your account team, get product manager on the phone. But needless to say, we have the MySQL community connector. Now, the only challenge I've run into so far is remote tables using Integration Hub. I could connect to a database using a mid server. In fact, JDBC connections require a mid server, which I kind of found annoying because what if I have a MySQL database that's in a cloud, so to speak? I could connect directly, but that's another topic of conversation. So when it came to this, I could not leverage my internal MySQL database or MariaDB using the mid server. That's kind of like one challenge, number one, with Workflow Data Fabric. I'm sure product's going to work on that. Remember, it just came out. So I did have to stand up a MySQL database in the cloud. So I'm going to go ahead and throw in these connections that I have saved on another, text document here, so I can just copy and paste everything in. And more importantly, the most important thing is this connection URL. I should probably block this out so you don't see it. However, I do know that there's IP address whitelisting, so I'm not too worried security. Plus, there's really not much in the database. It's a test database, right? And throw in my password here. So that's all I did so far. Run a connect. So it is going to take some time here to connect. So while it connects, I could either whistle or play some music. Maybe I'll edit in some kind of fun music or whatever. But needless to say, it is going through establishing that connection, and more importantly, it's reading all the data there. Now, when I did this as a remote table, I had to create the connection like you do in Integration Hub. I had specified the table. I had to do all the manual stuff that you would do for any type of database connection. Here is why I'm loving Workflow Data Fabric. It's showing me exactly which table I want to, it's giving me a list of tables. Now I only have one table in this database for demo purposes. It's the exact same data that I had that from where you saw that remote table. The only difference is that remote table is very specific in the query. In this case, you're going to see all the data. So I'm going to go ahead and say, let me just create a data table from this data. See, one click, is that great? I love this. I'll put in like Workflow Data Fabric, SQL incident data. Now you're going to see here, it is creating a table in ServiceNow to store this data as if it's a native table, which is what remote tables did, right? And now I'm saying, oh, let me just click which fields I want in this thing. And I'm going to make one a primary. Great. Finish that up. Confirm. Now, great, I got my table. I need to do some access controls. Please keep security in mind. So you do have to set up like different groups and roles. So I already have one set up here for this. By the way, the documentation is a little fuzzy on what you need to do for that. So you may have to dig around for it. But needless to say, you have to specify a particular group and a role to access this data. And for the most part, that's it. Like what? Less than 5 minutes to set this up. And more importantly, It's not going to add a table to my menu. I'd have to add that in, modify the menus to do it. But needless to say, if I just copy out that table name, throw it into my menu and do .list. So hopefully you know about this with the menu. You put in a table name, .do, it brings you up a form. .list takes you the list of records on that table, very basic. And let's go to that table. And once again, it's reaching out to the database, pulling it over real time. This is using, like I said, that additional infrastructure to do that. And then here's all my data. So it is a bit different because you see all the data. I'm not using any queries or anything to filter it in, but now I have essentially a native ServiceNow table. That's how it's seen natively. If I go into one of these records, it brings up the data. Of course, it's only read-only. So, if you're going to want to change the data, you have to still use Integration Hub to reach out to the database and change it, but fine, whatever. Now this table is readily available in my platform to use for AI. And once again, it's using that SQL query engine, pulling data over. So I only have, 5 records in this table, just demo purposes. It was so quick and easy to set this up. I just want to cry. Okay. But that goes to show you how easy and powerful this is. Now I have this data readily available to use in AI, set it up in indexing my AI search, whatever I want. And now you can kind of think, with Workflow Data Fabric, any data that's out there and accessible, we can connect to. And like I said before, remote tables are basic platform capability. So if you want to start doing this and you don't mind scripting, great, go do remote tables, set up a few external sources, try it out. But I wanted to walk you through, number one, why I see the Workflow Data Fabric as being very valuable for enterprise workflow. Number two, I wanted to highlight the ease of setup of this data and the comparison, especially with remote tables, which we've always been able to do zero copy. And third, I wanted to go in a little bit of the architecture. Why is this built in such a way to be very efficient for large amounts of data and why it's better than remote tables? Now you've got to understand from an enterprise platform perspective, we're branching out that value just beyond the basic workflow of what ServiceNow can do. We have all that enterprise data. Thank you very much for your time for watching this. I'm going to post it on YouTube here shortly. Put in comments, whatever. And I'm very glad you got to see like a quick demo and overview. And like I said, everything was real time. No, pre-built canned demos here. And I think that's incredibly powerful. Thank you again. Have a great time enjoying ServiceNow. I will talk to you later.